you talk about muscle being an organ of longevity. And I think
Yeah.
that's so key. Can you explain a little bit more about that for listeners, please?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest concepts that I teach is muscle-centric medicine. And muscle-centric medicine is exactly that. It's the concept that muscle is the largest endocrine organ in the body, and it's responsible for the trajectory of how we age. Arguably, it's responsible not only for our locomotion and physical prowess, it's also responsible for our metabolic nature, meaning being able to maintain our body composition. What's so interesting is when you think about it, diseases of Western society really are metabolic diseases.
Mm.
Alzheimer's, you know, there are genetic components of Alzheimer's early on, but Alzheimer's is a metabolic disease. Cardiovascular disease, hypertension, obesity, these are diabetes, these are diseases that relate to metabolism. Traditionally, people talk about fat tissue, right? It's all about adiposity and how do we lose weight, and we're obese and we're too overweight as the problem. That is a symptomology of a different root cause. The root cause is not obesity. The root cause is skeletal muscle. By understanding that skeletal muscle is the origin of the problem, then we actually can correct the way in which we go about executing treatment.
Yeah. And you talk a lot about this, right? That most people are actually under muscled,
Right.
because that's what gives them better lipid profiles in their bloods, better
Absolutely.
insulin sensitivity. And I think it's so important that people really understand this. My understanding is that muscle starts to decline from sort of 30 onwards if we're not using things like enough protein and resistance training. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And it's interesting because when we are very active, arguably that will be pushed out. We are domesticated as a species. So we use less, we use the escalator and even our jobs. Most people are not out in the field working.
Mm.
Individuals that are incredibly active are able to maintain muscle quality, which they probably did decades ago. However, when everything is now become more convenient, our capacity to maintain muscle really requires specific strategies. And that's exactly what you said, resistance training and really understanding the dosing of protein, how you utilize that nutrient to stimulate muscle.
Mm. It's, do you know, it's so important. And I wish more people would really, really get the concept because for me, what I've found, both myself and my clients, if ever I feel like, and none of us are in peak 100% physical condition all the time, right? Most people will even say, I have a few pounds or a few kilos to lose, right? Where they're within that margin. And for me, the best trigger for that is as soon as you begin to strength train and you increase your protein, the fat that you need to lose actually just drops off.
Yeah.
It isn't that difficult, right?
No, it's not.
Um, yeah. So can we talk then, before we go into the type of training
Yeah.
and the type and the amounts of protein, etc., people should be eating? Can you just briefly describe, because I know you have so much science on this,
Yeah.
why it's so important? Because you also talk about, you know, how our muscle will draw on those amino acid reserves in
Yeah.
times when we need immune function. I think people really need to understand just how important muscle mass is. It's not just aesthetic.
Absolutely. And we know that the data supports the higher the amount of muscle and the quality of muscle. It's interesting. It's not so much the amount of muscle because arguably we don't know. I don't know what the ideal skeletal muscle mass is for you. And we don't know what the ideal skeletal muscle mass is for me. And typically in the research, they use limbs, appendicular skeletal muscle mass. Is that enough? And is that a good validated measurement for understanding muscle? I'm not sure. But what we do know is that the stronger you are, the higher your capacity to survive. The higher your capacity to survive if you are on bed rest, if you get cancer, because cancer is a highly catabolic state. The body, the more skeletal muscle mass you have, the healthier that tissue is, the more you'll be able to survive. And that actually, what's so fascinating about muscle is it is the only organ that we can really add to. We actually can increase the amount of an organ that we have in the body,
Mm.
a significant amount. People could say, oh, well, you can train and make your cardiovascular system stronger, and perhaps there's some hypertrophy. While that is true, is that percentage that you are increasing the heart clinically significant? And the answer would likely be no. But skeletal muscle improves survivability across the board. And that is really fascinating for the data. In addition, any kind of insult you have, your body will draw from the reserve of amino acids from your skeletal muscle.
Yeah. So you actually need that for immune function. So actually, when you're talking there about people ending up, for example, in hospital, which is very, very common in the elderly, and you see that rapid decline, one hospital visit leads to the next, they're more likely to fall, but also they're catabolizing that muscle tissue to fight whatever infection or disease that they're hospitalized with. So it's so important. Yeah.
In order to increase an individual's survivability, you have to augment skeletal muscle. What also is so fascinating is that the tissue itself, muscle is a nutrient sensing organ, which means when you eat certain nutrients, specifically protein, it senses that. It senses the branched chain amino acids. It senses leucine. As we age, and leucine is a branched chain amino acid, which is found in high quality proteins, which I know that we'll get to. In fact, as you age, the efficiency of sensing that protein decreases. When you think about it, this is what you're up against when you think about it. Aging has there's a biological response to skeletal muscle tissue. No matter how fit you are, there's a biological response in the sensing capacity of that muscle, which is called anabolic resistance. Skeletal muscle also increases in insulin resistance as we age. It's just an aging phenomenon. So we have to become incredibly targeted at how we approach maintaining and keeping healthy tissue as we age.
Yeah, so important. And with that sensing ability, if you are targeting correctly, because I've seen, you can see, can't you, research that will show that even women in their 70s can gain more muscle tissue, more muscle mass.
Absolutely.
Age is not a block, is it?
Age is not a block. It's not a block at all. One would have to be very strategic. And there's two sides to that coin. You keep inflammation low. You keep any kind of catabolic state if they're going through long periods of fasting, which is not, I never recommend that for a more mature individual, and specifically because of its relationship to skeletal muscle. But you can always improve the quality of your life by improving strength training, and you can always improve. You can always lay down tissue as long as you are getting enough calories and enough protein.